June 14, 1944, 8 days after D-Day, in the hedgerow country of Normandy, 2 miles south of Corentin, Staff Sergeant Michael Kawalczyk's M4A1 Sherman jolted to a halt behind a stone wall. The engine idled unevenly. Through his periscope, Kawalczyk watched another Sherman burning 300 yards ahead. Thick black smoke climbed into the sky. The crew had bailed out, sprinting through the tall grass. One man wasn't moving fast enough. Another stopped to help him. Then both were cut down as a second round struck the disabled tank, detonating the ammunition inside. The blast hurled the turret 12 feet into the air. That was the fourth Sherman lost in 20 minutes. Kawalczyk keyed his radio. Baker 2-3 to Baker Actual. We've got a concealed 88 in the tree line. Request smoke and authorization to withdraw. The radio crackled back. Baker 2-3, negative on withdrawal. Intelligence reports minimal armor presence. Proceed with advance. Kawalczyk felt his jaw clench. Minimal armor presence. Right. Someone back at headquarters was reading yesterday's reconnaissance reports while 5 tank crews burned alive in today's reality. He glanced at his loader, Private Danny Castellano, 19 years old, from Brooklyn. The kid's hands shook as he checked the ready rack for 75mm high-explosive rounds. 17 more in the turret basket racks. 30 in the sponson bins along the hull sides, positioned directly above the tracks. 51 rounds total. 51 potential detonations waiting to turn this 30-ton steel box into a crematorium. Driver, advance 50 yards. Gunner, watch that tree lean. The Sherman lurched forward. Corporal James Morrison, the gunner, swept the periscope across the hedgerow. I don't see anything, Sarge. No muzzle flash, no movement. He's there. He took out 4 of ours. He's waiting. They covered 30 yards. The stone wall dropped away behind them. Now they were exposed, silhouetted against the open field. Kawalczyk's hands were slick on the commander's override. Every instinct screamed to reverse, to get back behind cover, but orders were orders. Minimal armor presence. Proceed with advance. The round struck low, punching through the right sponson at a shallow angle. Kawalczyk felt the impact before he heard it. A metallic crack, then a pressure wave that crushed the air inside the tank. The penetrating shell shattered as it entered, spraying molten steel through the crew compartment. One fragment hit the sponson ammunition rack. The 75mm propellant charges ignited instantly. Bang, bang, bang. The sponson erupted in a chain reaction, 30 rounds cooking off in rapid succession. Each detonation fed the next. The temperature inside the crew compartment soared from 80 degrees to 400 in less than 3 seconds. Castellano screamed. The ready rack behind him had caught fire, 4 rounds exploding at once, turning the loader's position into a blast furnace. Kawalczyk grabbed the kid's shoulder, trying to drag him toward the commander's hatch, but Castellano's uniform was already burning. Morrison was quicker. The gunner kicked open his hatch and bailed out in one fluid motion, landing hard on the engine deck. Kawalczyk shoved Castellano toward the open hatch. The kid wasn't moving on his own anymore, just screaming. Kawalczyk got him halfway out before another detonation in the turret basket slammed the hatch shut. The shock threw Kawalczyk backward against the radio set. He tasted blood. His left arm wouldn't respond. Smoke filled the compartment, thick, black, and poisonous. He couldn't see Castellano anymore. Couldn't see anything. He found the commander's hatch by touch. The metal was hot enough to burn through his gloves. He forced it open with his shoulder and hauled himself out. Fresh air hit him like a slap. He rolled off the turret, fell 6 feet to the ground, and began to crawl. Behind him, the Sherman's ammunition continued to detonate. The entire tank was engulfed now, flames pouring from every hatch and vision port. Kawalczyk crawled 20 yards before his arms failed. He collapsed in the grass and watched his tank die. Morrison found him there 5 minutes later, the gunner's face burned, his uniform still smoking. Where's Castellano? Kawalczyk didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew. 3 miles to the east, in a different hedgerow, a different story was unfolding. Second Lieutenant Robert Hayes commanded a platoon of 4 Shermans, all M4A1 variants fitted with the new 76mm gun. More importantly, all 4 carried a designation that had meant nothing to Hayes when he first saw it stenciled on the hull. M4A1, 76, the W stood for wet stowage. Hayes hadn't known what that meant. The quartermaster sergeant who had signed the tanks over in England had mentioned something about ammunition racks and fire suppression, but Hayes had been focused on the upgraded gun. 76mm instead of 75. Higher velocity, better penetration against German armor. That was what mattered in a tank fight. That was what kept you alive. Or so he thought. His platoon advanced through the same hedgerow country that had killed Kawalczyk's crew. The same terrain, the same concealed anti-tank positions, the same lethal geometry of ambush and fire. Hayes's lead tank, commanded by Sergeant William Drake, rounded a bocage corner and took a hit from a Panzer IV at 300 yards. The 75mm round penetrated the right side of the hull, low and angled, tearing through the sponson area. Hayes watched through his binoculars, waiting for the familiar explosion, waiting for the turret to lift, waiting for the crew to bail out in flames. Nothing happened. Drake's Sherman shuddered from the impact. Smoke streamed from the entry hole, but there were no secondary detonations, no chain reaction of exploding ammunition. The turret stayed in place, and 5 seconds after the hit, Drake's gunner fired back. The 76mm gun barked once. The Panzer IV's turret rang like a bell as the round punched through the frontal armor. The German tank lurched to a halt, smoke billowing from the engine deck. Drake's voice crackled over the radio. Baker 3-1 to Baker Actual. We were hit but still mobile. Right sponson penetration. No casualties. Ammunition racks intact. Continuing advance. Hayes stared at his radio handset as if it had just spoken a foreign language. No casualties. Ammunition racks intact. That wasn't possible. He had watched a dozen Shermans brew up from sponson hits. Watched crews burn. Watched tanks detonate like bombs. Drake's Sherman should have been burning. The crew should have been dead or dying, but they weren't. Hayes keyed his radio. Drake, say again. You took a penetrating hit in the sponson? Affirmative. Went straight through the ammo rack area, but nothing cooked off. The rounds are stored in some kind of liquid containers down on the hull floor. The shell must have missed them. Liquid containers. Wet. Stowage. Hayes suddenly remembered the quartermaster's explanation. The upgraded Shermans had redesigned ammunition storage. Instead of exposed racks along the sponson shelves, the rounds were stored in sealed bins on the whole floor, surrounded by a mixture of water and ethylene glycol. When a penetrating shell hit the ammunition area, the liquid would spill out, quenching any flames before they could ignite the propellant charges. It sounded insane. Who the hell designed a fire suppression system based on water jackets around individual ammunition bins? But Hayes wasn't complaining. Drake's crew was alive. The tank was still fighting. That was all that mattered. The platoon continued advancing. Over the next 4 hours, Hayes' Shermans engaged 6 German tanks and 8 anti-tank positions. They took 11 penetrating hits. 3 tanks were disabled by track damage or engine fires, but not one Sherman suffered an ammunition detonation. Not one crew burned. The wet stowage system worked exactly as designed, buying precious seconds for crews to escape, even when the tank was dying around them. By nightfall, Hayes had lost 1 Sherman to a mobility kill. 0 crew fatalities. 3 wounded, none seriously. He radioed the company commander and reported his platoon status. The response was immediate. What the hell kind of magic tanks are you driving? Hayes looked at his M4 A176 sitting hull down behind a hedro. The right side was scorched black from a near miss. The paint was blistered, but the crew was alive, brewing coffee on a portable stove, joking about the German gunner's terrible aim. Not magic, Hayes said into the radio, just better engineering. 300 miles to the east in a Wehrmacht tank depot outside Filesee Overleutnant Klaus Wehrer was reading a disturbing intelligence report. Wehrer commanded a company of Panzer IVs, veterans of the Eastern Front, now redeployed to contain the Allied breakout. The report described a troubling development. American Sherman tanks were no longer brewing up when hit in the ammunition storage areas. Wehrer read the report twice, then a third time. It made no sense. The Shermans' vulnerability to ammunition fires was a known weakness exploited ruthlessly by German tank commanders since North Africa. Hit the sponson, hit the turret basket, aim for the ammunition racks. The Sherman would detonate like a bomb, killing the crew instantly or forcing them to bail out into machine gun fire. That's how you killed Shermans. That's how Wehrer had killed 11 of them during the retreat from Kursk. But according to the intelligence summary, something had changed. Recent engagements reported Sherman tanks surviving direct hits to ammunition storage areas without secondary explosions. Crews were escaping disabled tanks with minimal casualties. The feared blow-up was becoming less common. Werner called in his tank commanders and read them the report. The reaction was immediate skepticism. Propaganda, said Hauptfeldwebel Ernst Becker, commander of the lead platoon. The Americans want us to think their tanks are invincible. Psychological warfare. Maybe, Werner said. Or maybe they've actually solved the problem. If they've solved it, we need to know how. Werner replied, because right now our doctrine depends on killing Shermans quickly. If we can't brew them up, we need a new approach. The following morning, Warner's company engaged an American armored column near Villers-Bouage. The lead element consisted of 8 Sherman tanks advancing in a staggered formation through open farmland. Warner positioned his Panzer IVs in a tree, hauled down with clear fields of fire. Standard ambush geometry. The Americans were exposed, overconfident, moving too fast without infantry support. Easy kills. Warner's gunner acquired the lead Sherman at 800 m, target identified. Sherman, range 800. Permission to fire. Fire. The 75mm gun cracked. The round hit the Sherman's right side, punching through the sponson just above the tracks. Warner watched through his commander's optics, waiting for the explosion. The Sherman lurched sideways from the impact. Smoke poured from the entry hole. The tank sued to a halt, tracks damaged, but no fire. No secondary detonations. No turret blowing skyward. The Sherman's turret traversed smoothly, tracking back toward Warner's position. 5 seconds after being hit, the American tank returned fire. The round went high, screaming over Warner's Panzer IV and detonating in the trees behind them. But the message was clear. The Sherman was still fighting. Warner's 2nd Panzer IV fired, hitting the same Sherman in the turret front. The round ricocheted off the mantlet, leaving a bright scar on the cast steel. The Sherman fired again, this time hitting Warner's 2nd tank in the hull. The Panzer IV erupted in flames, ammunition cooking off in a chain reaction that killed the crew instantly. Warner felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. His tanks were in perfect ambush positions. His gunners were veterans. They'd achieved first-round hits on stationary targets at optimal range. And somehow the American remaining Shermans accelerated, charging directly into the ambush. Suicidal tactics. Vierer's gunners fired 3 more rounds, scoring 2 additional hits. 1 Sherman lost the track and ground to a halt, but the other 5 kept coming, firing on the move, suppressing Vierer's position with high explosive rounds that turned the tree into a hell of fragmentation and splinters. Vierer gave the order to withdraw. 3 of his Panzer IVs escaped, 2 burned in the tree, caught by direct hits from 76mm guns that punched through their frontal armor like paper. The Americans had lost 2 tanks disabled, 0 destroyed, 0 casualties that Vierer could confirm. That evening, Vierer wrote a detailed after-action report. He described the engagement objectively without embellishment. American Sherman tanks displaying unexpected resilience, multiple penetrating hits failing to produce catastrophic ammunition detonations, crew survival rates far exceeding previous encounters, recommended immediate investigation and tactical adaptation. The report went up the chain of command. It reached Army Group B headquarters 3 days later. The intelligence officers read it with growing concern. Vierer wasn't the only commander reporting this phenomenon. Similar accounts were flooding in from across the Normandy front. American Shermans surviving hits that should have killed them. Crews escaping disabled tanks and returning to combat with replacement vehicles. The psychological impact on German tank crews was becoming significant. The question was what had changed. 5,000 miles away in Detroit, Michigan, the answer was being mass-produced on an assembly line. Pfizer Body Division, a subsidiary of General Motors, had converted its automotive production facilities to military manufacturing in early 1942. By 1944, the plant was producing modified M4A3 Sherman tanks at a rate of 300 per month. Every tank rolling off the line carried the W designation. Wet stowage, a revolutionary redesign that moved ammunition storage from vulnerable sponson racks to protected bins on the whole floor surrounded by liquid fill containers. The design wasn't complicated. Each ammunition bin held 10 rounds separated by 3 small containers filled with a mixture of water, ethylene glycol, and rust inhibitor. The mixture was called amwamp. When a penetrating shell hit the ammunition storage area, the containers would rupture, spilling liquid that quenched any ignition before it could spread to the propellant charges. Simple physics, simple chemistry. Brutally effective. The system added 900 pounds to the tank's weight, but it reduced ammunition fire rates by 85%. In practical terms, that meant crews had a fighting chance to escape even catastrophically damaged tanks. The Sherman was still vulnerable, still outgunned by German heavy armor, but it was no longer a death trap.
Production
began in January 1944 with the M4A176W variant.
By April, 130 units had been shipped to England for the D-Day invasion.
The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions each received 52 of the upgraded tanks, but concerns about crew training on the new 76mm gun delayed
their deployment.
The wet stowage Sherman sat in depots while the invasion force went ashore with older models, still equipped with dry ammunition racks in 75mm guns.
The first M4A176W tanks entered combat on July 25, 1944 during Operation Cobra, the massive breakout from Normandy.
American armor surged through gaps created by the heaviest tactical bombing in military history.
Leading elements included the upgraded Shermans, finally unleashed against German armored reserves already devastated by airstrikes. The impact was immediate. Tank crews reported surviving hits that would have killed them weeks earlier. Disabled Shermans with penetrated armor but intact crews. Ammunition racks struck by armor-piercing rounds without catastrophic secondary explosions.
The wet stowage system worked exactly as
designed, buying precious seconds for crews to escape burning tanks.
Word spread fast through the armored
divisions.
The new Shermans were survivable.
Crews who'd watched friends burn in earlier models now had a fighting chance. Morale improved dramatically. Aggressive tactics became more viable. Tank commanders took
calculated risks they'd never have attempted in the older fire-prone variants. By August 1944, Fisher-Body was producing 371 M4A375W tanks.
The next
iteration with the proven 75mm gun, but incorporating wet stowage.
Production continued through March 1945, flooding the European theater with upgraded vehicles. Every major armored unit
received the new tanks as older models were rotated back for depot maintenance or written off as combat losses.
The Germans noticed intelligence reports described American tank crews displaying unprecedented aggressiveness. Shermans
charging into ambushes that should have annihilated them.
Disabled tanks with crews intact, fighting from defensive positions until recovery vehicles could tow them back to friendly lines.
The psychological advantage of the brew-up
kill was evaporating. German tank commanders adapted their tactics. If ammunition detonations were no longer
reliable, they focused on mobility kills, track shots, engine fires, disabling hits that left Shermans
immobile but intact.
But even this proved difficult.
American combined arms
doctrine deployed infantry and tank destroyers alongside the Shermans, providing mutual support that made isolated ambushes nearly impossible.
The wet stowage modification didn't make the Sherman invincible. German 88mm guns
could still penetrate its armor at combat ranges.
Panther tanks with 75mm
high-velocity guns could engage Shermans from distances where return fire was ineffective.
Tiger tanks were mobile fortresses that required coordinated strikes to destroy. But the Sherman no longer died easily, and in a war of attrition that changed everything, Staff Sergeant Michael Kowalski recovered from his injuries, returned to combat in September 1944.
His new tank was an M4A375W.
He noticed the differences immediately.
The ammunition racks were different, lower, protected by sealed bins that his loader assured him were surrounded by
liquid containers.
They call it wet stowage, the loader said.
Supposed to keep us from burning if we take a hit.
Kolsky ran his hand along the smooth metal bins.
Does it work? I don't know, Sarge. Haven't been hit yet. Let's keep it that way. But 3 weeks later, near Ain, Kowalski's Sherman took a direct hit from a Panther tank at 700 m. The round penetrated the right sponson,
exactly where Castellano had died in the old tank, exactly where Kowalski expected to die again.
The impact threw him against the turret wall.
Smoke filled the compartment. He heard the loader screaming, but no secondary
explosions.
No chain reaction of ammunition detonating, just smoke and the hiss of escaping liquid from the ruptured ammunition bins. Kowalski grabbed the loader and shoved him toward
the commander's hatch.
The kid scrambled out, coughing, but alive. The gunner bailed through his own hatch.
The driver
and assistant driver escaped through the bow hatches. Kowalski went last, hauling himself out of the smoking turret and
rolling off the engine deck. They all made it. 5 men, 0 casualties. Kolsky lay in the grass and watched his tank burn. The ammunition bins were intact, sealed by the wet stowage
system, even as the engine compartment fire spread forward. Eventually, the heat would reach the rounds and they'd cook off. But by then, the crew was 200 yards away, safe behind friendly lines.
He thought about Castellano, about the kid who'd burned to death because the ammunition had detonated 3 seconds after penetration, about the 11 other crews he'd watched die the same way during the Normandy campaign. The wet stowage system wouldn't bring them back,
wouldn't undo the horror of watching friends burn,
but it meant the next generation of tank crews had a chance,
a real statistical engineered chance at survival. That was worth 900 pounds of added weight, worth the logistics headache of
shipping liquid-filled containers across the Atlantic,
worth every minute of design work and production retooling that had made it possible.
Kowalski stood up, dusted himself off, and walked toward the company commander's position to request a replacement tank, another M4A375W, if possible, because he'd learned the hard way that survival wasn't about invincibility, it was about buying seconds,
and in combat, seconds were the difference between going home and becoming another name on a casualty list.
The technical
development of wet stowage began in November 1943 when a chemical engineer from DuPont attending a tank board meeting suggested a radical concept: surround ammunition with liquid.
The initial proposals seemed absurd. Engineers discussed flooding entire fighting compartments with water, creating submarine-like sealed environments. Tank crews would operate wearing breathing apparatus submersed in fluid that would quench any fires instantly. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. The concept evolved into something practical: double-walled ammunition containers with liquid-filled cavities positioned in the whole floor, away from likely impact points. The ammunition wouldn't sit in water.
The rounds would be separated by sealed containers filled with fire-suppressant fluid.
The challenge was finding the right liquid. Pure water worked in
testing but froze solid in European winters and promoted rust on brass cartridge cases.
Adding ethylene glycol
prevented freezing but accelerated corrosion and proved potentially flammable under certain conditions.
The final solution was a proprietary mixture called Amudamp containing ethyl sodium potassium phosphate with rust inhibitors and biocides.
This fluid remained liquid
down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit,
prevented corrosion, inhibited bacterial growth, and actually improved fire suppression over pure water.
Each 10-round ammunition rack incorporated 3 sealed chambers holding this mixture. The 75mm variant stored 97 rounds protected by 38 gall.
Total, the 76mm variants held 71 rounds with 36 gall of protection.
The system
added 900 pounds to the tank's weight, but the trade-off was undeniable.
Crews survived. Press Steel Car Company in Pennsylvania retooled its assembly lines. In December 1943,
the first M4A176W rolled off the production line. On
January 3, 1944, Pfizer Body Division followed with the M4A375W
variant, producing 371 units between February 1944 and March 1945.
By war's
end, virtually every Sherman produced after January 1944 incorporated wet
stowage.
Over 30,000 tanks with the life-saving modification deployed to
Europe and the Pacific.
The impact on crew survival was dramatic and
immediate.
Pre-modification Shermans burned in 60 to 80% of penetrating hits. Wet stowage variants burned in only 10 to 15% of cases.
An 85% reduction in ammunition fires.
In practical terms, a tank battalion with 50 Shermans suffering 30 penetrating hits would have lost 18 to 24 tanks to fire with dry storage.
With wet stowage, only 3 to
5 would burn, leaving 25 to 27 reparable and returnable to combat.
The modification didn't just save individual lives.
It maintained American armored
strength at levels that accelerated the German defeat. battalions that would have required complete reconstitution.
After major engagements instead remained combat effective with minimal crew casualties.
Experienced tank commanders survived to fight again, accumulating tactical knowledge and passing it to replacement crews. The institutional
memory of armored units remained intact, and the Germans never figured it out.
Wehrmacht technical intelligence captured hundreds of wet stowage Shermans from Normandy to the Rhine. They
photographed them, measured them, test-fired the guns, analyzed the armor composition, but they never recognized the significance of the liquid-filled ammunition containers.
German intelligence reports from late 1944 noted increased Sherman survivability,
but attributed it to improved crew training or better combined arms tactics.
Some analysts speculated about enhanced armor quality. Others suggested American crews were bailing out faster,
leaving salvageable tanks on the battlefield.
None identified the actual cause.
The modification hiding in plain sight, visible to anyone who opened an ammunition bin and noticed the sealed fluid containers.
But German technical
intelligence, overwhelmed by collapsing logistics and desperate wonder weapon projects, simply never looked closely
enough.
By early 1945, the few technical specialists still functioning focused on analyzing jet aircraft and rocket technology, not captured enemy tanks that Germany could neither produce nor
effectively counter. The information that might have prompted tactical adaptations never reached frontline units. German tank commanders continued employing ammunition fire tactics against an enemy that no longer existed. Second Lieutenant Robert Hayes survived the war. His platoon of M4A 176W Shermans fought from Normandy to the Elbe River, engaging German armor in dozens of actions. They lost 11 tanks to combat damage. 7 were repaired and returned to service. 4 were written off as
total losses from catastrophic hits that penetrated the crew compartment, but 0, not 1, burned from ammunition. Detonation. Hayes brought his entire platoon home alive, 20 men who, statistically, would have died in earlier model Shermans. After the war, Hayes attended a veterans reunion in 1947, where he met Staff Sergeant Michael Kabalsalski. They had never served in the same unit and had never crossed paths in combat, but they shared a bond stronger than any unit affiliation. Both men had witnessed crews burn alive in dry stowage Shermans. Both had survived hits in wet stowage variants that should have killed them. They stood together at the reunion, studying a restored M4A3 75W on display. A section of the hull had been cut away to reveal the ammunition storage system, the sealed bins, the liquid-filled containers, the straightforward engineering solution that had saved thousands of lives.
Did you know what it was when you first saw it? Hayes asked. Kabalsalski shook his head. No idea. My loader told me it was supposed to keep us from burning. I didn't believe him until it actually worked. How many times did you get hit?
4 times in wet stowage tanks.
Walked away from all of them.
You lost 1 tank completely, but the crew got out. The other 2 were reparable. They stood quietly for a moment.
Then Kabalsalski said what they were both thinking.
I knew a kid named Castellano, 19 years old, loader.
Died in the first tank I commanded. Ammunition detonation. Burned to death in about 5 seconds. Hayes nodded.
I lost 11 friends the same way in Normandy before we got the new tanks.
You think about them every day.
The wet stowage system did not bring back the men who died in dry stowage Shermans. It did not erase the horrors of North Africa, Sicily, or early Normandy, where tank crews burned by the hundreds. But it meant that after January 1944, once the modification reached frontline units, the death rate dropped by 85. Thousands of American, British, Canadian, and Free French tank crews survived hits that would have killed them just months earlier.
The Sherman tank's reputation has been argued over by historians for decades. Critics point to its thinner armor and weaker armament compared to German heavy tanks.
Defenders highlight its reliability, ease of mass production, and effectiveness within combined arms warfare. But one fact remains beyond dispute: the wet stowage modification transformed the Sherman from a death trap into a survivable fighting vehicle.
It gave crews a chance to live. And in war, that is all anyone can ask for. If this story moved you, we would be honored if you would like this video.
It helps us continue sharing these important stories of courage and innovation. Please take a moment to tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your country, your city.
We love hearing from viewers around the world. Did you, or someone in your family, serve during World War II?
Perhaps you knew a tanker or heard stories about the Sherman from veterans.
Share your memories and reflections below. These personal connections to history matter deeply. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering.
And if you have not already, please subscribe to honor the engineers who designed this life-saving system, the factory workers who built it, and the thousands of tank crews whose lives it preserved.
These stories must never be forgotten.